Nigeria Economic Summit ends with a memorandum of understanding to boost the country's educational sector, just as the federal government launches MSME's clinic in Bauchi. Plus, gold prices hit over 3-month high. These and more on this edition of Business Express, reaching you from the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA. I am Amina Nujaim. Welcome. Now, a lot went down at the just concluded Nigeria Economic Summit, and we'll be highlighting some of these points. The Minister of Finance, Zainab Ahmed, says big businesses operating in Nigeria take the federal government and stipulated regulations for granted. The minister was speaking on the sidelines of the 24th Nigerian Economic Summit in Abuja. Zainab Ahmed, who noted that the incident was damaging to the federal government, explained that the telecommunications firm only provided what the Central Bank of Nigeria requested after it ordered MTN and some affected deposit money banks to refund about $8.1 billion. The ministry is engaging regulatory authorities to make sure that this does not happen again. The federal government is assuring Nigerians that the 2019 general elections will not affect its commitment to deliver on the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan (ERGP). Minister of Finance Zainab Ahmed, while speaking as a panelist on the sustainable economic opportunities at the Nigeria Economic Summit, affirmed that government is aware of the sense of urgency in the implementation of the policies to grow the economy. Leah Katung-Babatunde reports.
In 2016, the World Bank pointed out that Nigeria needs an estimated 40 million jobs to cater for new market entrants by the year 2030. 12 years to that target, the Nigerian Economic Summit is availing public and private sector players the opportunity to discuss sustainable economic opportunities with a growing number of entrants into the job market. Minister of Finance Zainab Ahmed at a plenary session said government through the ERGP will harness the potentials of the large population of Nigerian youths and their entrepreneurial passion.
The President has asked some of us to just keep our eye on the ball, to focus on delivering on the ERGP and delivering on the goals and targets that are set.
There were concerns over the sustenance of the ERGP beyond 2019 and the next phase of government's plans for the socio-economic development of the nation.
I think it's important that the elections must enable us to have a discussion around, so what next?
If you've got power and electricity, whether it's grid power or off-grid power, and distributed power to more cities and certainly more rural communities in this country, you would have a revolution.
The minister insists that government will implement more inclusive growth models through its social investment programs that presently covers 9.2 million people, including 8.7 million children being fed under the school feeding program. In Abuja, I'm Leah Katung-Babatunde, NTA News.
Nigeria's educational sector receives a boost with the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding between Nigeria Economic Summit Group and the National Universities Commission. Let's join Kunle Adeyeye for details.
The 25-year Memorandum of Understanding is for the introduction of skills in the country's university education curriculum. The summit also bets the adoption of e-learning in early education as part of innovation to develop Nigeria's knowledge economy. Chairman of the Nigeria Economic Summit Group, Asue Igodalo, who, along with other officials, briefed the media at the end of the summit, also commended the anti-corruption stance of the present administration.
The commitment of this government to fighting corruption is not in doubt. But there are many facets and many, we call it multidimensional. And if you listen to the Vice President yesterday, he said the harder you fight, the harder corruption fights back. So what I can assure you is that from our own interaction with this government and with the government from the very top, is that their focus on fighting corruption is not in doubt.
The Sustainable Development Goal number 4 is hinged on sustainable education, with millions of children out of school. This edition of Business Express seeks to examine the current level of investment in education and the future as Nigeria seeks to meet the yearnings of our growing population to guarantee economic prosperity. Let's take this background report by Musa Abubakar.
At the just concluded annual meetings of the World Bank and IMF in Bali, President of the World Bank Group, Jim Yong Kim, made a profound statement. The World Bank had focused on infrastructure provision in countries like Nigeria without much attention to education.
This way, I think that there is that the World Bank has to take some responsibility for having emphasized hard infrastructure, roads, rails, energy for a very long time. And that changed 20 years ago. But there has still been the bias that says, we'll invest in hard infrastructure, and then when we grow rich, we'll have enough money to invest in health and education. We're now saying that that's really the wrong approach, that you've got to start investing in your people right now.
A new World Bank research gives policymakers compelling evidence that delivering better outcomes in children's health and learning can significantly boost the incomes of people and of countries with returns far into the future. The Human Capital Index, which was launched at the World Bank IMF annual meetings, showed that 56% of children born today across the world will lose more than half their potential lifetime earnings because governments are not currently making effective investment in their people to ensure a healthy, educated, and resilient population ready for the workplace of the future. Back home in Nigeria, Vice President Yemi Osinbajo, at the just concluded Nigeria Economic Summit, drove home the need to invest more in education and health at all levels of government.
Well, how do we explain the paradox of high growth figures and rising poverty and unemployment figures? The first explanation is that high oil revenues do not necessarily translate to jobs. The oil industry by itself produces very few jobs. The high revenues can only translate to jobs and better living standards if the revenues are invested in diversification of the economy, infrastructure, education and healthcare, and social protection for those who cannot work. The question, of course, is what happens to these revenues? How come we're unable to use the revenues in the way that they ought to be used?
The challenge to education is a matter of concern as a staggering 102 million people in the country are poor and more than 10 million children are out of school. Business Express today seeks to look into the issue of investment in education for a more prosperous economy.
Thank you, Musa, for that background report. Michael Magaji is the Vice President of the Unity Schools Old Students Association, USASA. He is a faculty member at the Kaduna Business School and board member, Brookhouse Schools in Kenya, among many other educational-related portfolios. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Business Express.
Thank you for having me.
How would you paint a picture of the quality of education in Nigeria and the availability of that in the country?
Well, it's pretty gloomy. If you look at the education stress index across the primary, secondary, and tertiary institutions, on almost every indicator, there's been deterioration over the years, whether it's in enrollment, it's quality, it's the environment, it's infrastructure. Across all areas, it's pretty gloomy. And I'm sure that's why the federal government did declare a state of emergency just recently to address those issues.
Now, looking at that background report from Musa Abubakar, the Vice President was saying that the availability of oil in itself does not guarantee jobs, that it was focus on diversification. Do you agree with that?
Oil is a revenue earner. We earn funds from oil. But what do we do with it, and how much of it is applied to the education sector? UNESCO prescribes 26% as part of your budget to be applied for education. How is this being applied in Nigeria in terms of the real thing? So oil will not guarantee education, but the resources, we must commit and dedicate resources to the educational sector to make a difference. And I think that's the biggest challenge, especially at the primary stage of education enrollment.
Now, talking about challenges, from the learning environment to the staff, is Nigeria investing enough in the education sector?
Clearly, again, it's still a gloomy picture. Infrastructure is terrible. In USOSA, for example, we are 104 schools, and across the schools, we've had big challenges with infrastructure. The learning environment, both for the teachers and students, has been deplorable. For staffing too, we have issues with non-recruitment of teachers. Only recently, teachers started being recruited, and we've had things like PTA teachers, which PTAs give subvention for, as opposed to government teachers who should be paid for by the government, who is the owner of the asset. I mean, so how do you explain that? Then, if you look at staffing and the quality of staffing, look at the Kaduna example, look at the Kwara example, where teachers were tested and they failed, 75% of them failed. So clearly, we need to create a pipeline, a clear plan for teachers. Particularly, I'm concerned about teachers because they deliver the content, they deliver the message. Even if we have fancy infrastructure and we don't have teachers to deliver the message, we're going nowhere. You can have a fancy dining hall, fancy class, but we need to equip teachers with the pedagogical skills, the modern pedagogical skills, acquaint them with the learning management systems and the modern curriculum to make our schools move forward.
Now, who is supposed to educate and retrain these teachers?
Well, of course, I mean, if it's a government school, it's the government, all right? But I have also advocated the government needs partnership from associations like us, all students who have seen best quality education. The federal government colleges, if you like, those days were the Rolls Royce of education. Those were the schools that people wanted to go to for the best education. It was the same government. It was still government who was doing this, and government is a continuum, all right? So the government must look very closely at what the schools require, do a proper needs assessment, and intervene with modern tools. I'm happy to hear things like STEM are coming on board, teaching coding are coming on board, but the teachers also must be equipped to be able to learn, Then what about the other agencies that fund, like UBEC, for example? 60 billion naira is sitting in UBEC unaccessed when people don't have access to quality education. What is being done to deploy those resources? So you have all those stakeholders. What happened to the Nigerian Students Loan Board? What happened to the Bureau for External Aid in the Ministry of Education? I used to bring funding for scholarships to improve capacity of our students, to improve capacity of our teachers. So it's not just the government alone, but the government has a lot to do in terms of institutional readiness to deal with the problems of education.
If you say UBEC is the way forward, why are funds lying idle in UBEC?
Well, essentially what we are told and what we read is that the states have not come forward to access because they've either not been able to retire what had been spent earlier on, or they're not able to provide counterpart funding because the law says the federal government will bring 50% through UBEC and then the states put another 50%. Now that is the gap. Now you want to ask yourself, why are the sub-national governments not coming forward with counterpart funding to advance the educational cause of their people? I think these are the questions that we need to address.
Let me take you back a little. You're talking about how associations of all students can improve the situation at the moment. In terms of practicality, how? Is it by you guys putting an effort, or is it intervening, or how would you contribute to improve the situation?
Yeah, I want to say that we all students of the federal government colleges owe this country a debt. Okay, because they gave us good quality education, they gave us cheap education, subsidized education, and we are who we are because of that formation stage, that background that we all had. So we have now reunited, some of us 40, 50 years after those schools were established, to see how we can give back. But it's not enough. Okay, through these associations, we're intervening. In my own old school, we're intervening. We've done more than 20 projects over the last 2-3 years, and it's continuous, but it's an intervention. Okay, but what we need is sustainable planning and growth. It's not just intervention. So we will continue to support, we will continue to partner with the federal government, but the federal government owns those assets and should take that responsibility and bring us in to help them also implement.
Partner how?
Partner, well, I mean, it's partnership and we're all stakeholders. all right? We are also government. We're also part of government. The leaders and the led are part of government. We all have our roles to play, all right? We should hold our leaders accountable, and that's our way of participating in governance. So we want to partner with the government and see that their own plans for education are actually actualized, all right? And you have another party who can look at it independently and say, well, yes, you know what? I think you guys are doing a good job, or we think you need to improve in this particular area. And I think we have the skill, we have the brain power, we have the people who can do this that have come out of Unity schools and did many other old school associations.
Now, we've been talking about funding and you've been mentioning federal government. What is the role of states in all of this, and maybe even the private sector?
Well, you know, in the Constitution, there's the concurrent list. Education falls on the concurrent list. So it means the federal, national government and the sub-national governments have a joint responsibility to co-fund education, all right? And it is important that leadership at all these levels understand the importance itself of education, you know, so that they can apply this fund. So, I mean, states do not see their responsibility. Clearly, we can see that because of the kind of money sitting in your bank, unassessed, clearly some states are not playing their role. And we want to call on them to go in there, provide counterpart funding and rescue their states and bring education back to the front burner. I think that's very critical. So both have a role to play, but the federal government has done its bit because constitutionally a 2% charge, first line charge is taken from the Consolidated Revenue Fund every year to your bank. No dispute about that. It is legislated already. It's automatic. Now, to say that there's money sitting in there, I don't want to call it free money, but there's money sitting there that's not accessed. It's totally unacceptable. And that is part of what's causing this crisis.
Now, I'm looking at the data here that says more than 10 million out of school. If the school children, if the level of literacy is not addressed, what would the future, for example, of the Nigerian economy look like?
I mean, a point of correction, it's not 10 million, it's 13.5 as at 2018. Okay, 10 million was 2015. Today, 3.5 million have been added to that.
10 million is UNICEF?
No, 2015. Check the records. It's 2015. 2018 tells you it's 13.5 because of the insurgency problems in the Northeast. So many more have fallen out of school and many more are not able to access. Okay, that shows you the tragedy, okay, because total enrollment in primary schools, for example, in the country is somewhere in the region of 25 million. Now, if 13.5 million are still out of school, so there's half of those people out of school, okay, then you have 25. So it shows you that we need to double capacity at the minimum to absorb that 13.5 million based on current figures. All right, so it's a very big issue we have in our hands, and we have to deal with it very, very decisively. And until our leadership and our followership, you know, in all arms of government realize that this is a very serious situation, we're going to be having a lot of issues for a long time to come.
Now, in addressing some of these challenges, we have the tertiary, we have the secondary, and we have the primary. A situation whereby more funding goes to tertiary institutions rather than the secondary and the primary. Do you think there's enough investment at the bottom part?
Well, I don't have the immediate figures, but if that is the case, again, that is an aberration, okay? The formative years of children are the most important in terms of, you know, their growth and their brain development and their abilities. So the first 9 years of school are the most critical. People may not have to go through secondary or even university to earn a living. They could go vocational, other skills could be developed. But the primary school is the beginning. And that must be guaranteed, and constitutionally that has been guaranteed. So we should make it that way, that indeed those first 9 years are free, they are guaranteed, and all those responsible, from the federal to the state governments, for giving funding for this stage of or this level of education should be committed to doing that. Otherwise, every other thing it will make no sense. If you throw out kids from primary school who are not well trained and they go to secondary or university and you fund it, you know, you're just chasing shadows. The important thing is to get the primary right, and then from there, the secondary and the university will be piece of cake.
Now, experts have consistently insisted that Nigeria and other countries don't lack policies, but the issue is implementation. Is that true?
Well, of course, policy is largely theoretical, okay? We must also demonstrate, and that's why I said we must be able to plan and sustain the plan through careful and continuous implementation. We've had too many gaps in between. Okay. I mean, everybody comes up with his own new agenda, whether it is the leadership or it is, you know, people, so there's that disconnect, so to speak. So we need to consistently plan. the policies also need to be revised. A policy that was relevant 10, 15 years ago might not be relevant today. Today we're talking about STEM. STEM was not on the table 10 years ago. Coding was not on the table. Today it's on the table. So there's nothing in our policy that actually reflects things like STEM. What about the pedagogical tools for teachers? Okay, those have changed from 20, 30 years ago. So policy also must be reviewed, but most importantly implementation, because that's how the people will feel the impact of government, and feel the impact of the sector. So it's very important that continuously there must be much more creativity and innovation in dealing with implementation, and then consistently following it through over a period of 15, 20, 30 years. Time for emergencies are over. We have too many emergencies at the moment.
Now, talking about emergencies, I'm still looking at the data here that says that Nigeria's population is going to be the third most populous nation in the world by 2050. Now, how urgent is the need to invest in education?
You see, I mean, the challenge for most governments is how to bridge the gap between growth and development. Growth in the demographics, okay, with collateral infrastructure to support that growth. So the moment a child is born in Nigeria, the government has to start thinking of how they're going to get into school, what hospitals will be available to them, how much food they'll have access to, and all those indicators. So we must plan very consistently. We must have the statistics, we must have the data, and then we must also match this data with collateral investment that should come to support this growth. Otherwise, it means we just have to reduce having, and I'm sure Nigeria's birth rate is 5.5 per family. You know, that's already pretty high. But the government must also be able to plan for this growth, you know, with infrastructure that would take care of, you know, this growing population.
Okay. Now going to the Nigerian Stock Exchange, the equities market today closed on a negative note, with the OSHA index depreciating by 2.37% to close at 32,403.60 basis point, and market capitalization slide back to 11.8 trillion naira. You are watching Business Express, reaching you on the network service of the NTA. You can contribute to the program via our website, businessexpress@nta.gov.ng. You can also reach us through our Twitter handle, NTA News Now. Don't forget the hashtag BizExp showing on your screen. Now, moving on. As part of its empowerment program, the federal government has launched the Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises Clinic in Bauchi. This, the Vice President says, will promote entrepreneurship and wealth creation in the country. State House correspondent Jide Onifade reports.
It's a donation least expected, but one which shows that the objective of the social investment programs of the federal government is being realized. As Vice President Yemi Osinbajo says, the Buhari administration is committed to the betterment of all Nigerians.
The reason why the president decided that we must have the school feeding program to provide opportunities for people. President Muhammadu Buhari's commitment to Nigeria is that he will not steal Nigeria's resources. He will use Nigeria's money for the benefit of Nigerians. That is the pledge that he made the day that he became president, and he has maintained that pledge till now.
The state's economy is boosted on a monthly basis by 864 million naira through the homegrown school feeding program, 390 million naira through the NPower program, and over 180 million naira through the non-graduate empowerment program, just to mention a few.
The determination of our government is to see to it that Nigeria's resources, Nigeria's money is used for the benefit of Nigerians. We will not allow any part of Nigeria's resources to be used for private purposes. This country can afford to provide for its own people. We can afford to provide for our people. We can afford to provide jobs. That is why we are determined and committed to making sure that we provide for our people everywhere, especially for young men and women like yourself.
Appreciating the federal government efforts in rolling out the special intervention programs, this administration has domesticated them such that the programs and activities are put in place to reach out to the poorest of the poor in the state and provide skills acquisition training for our youth and women in order to make them self-reliant.
European stocks opened higher amidst earnings. Let's join Bosede Abel for details on global stocks.
African stocks were slightly mixed in the early hours of Wednesday, 24th October. Ghana's GSE Composite Index, Tunisia's Tunidex, Nairobi All Share, and South Africa's GSE Africa Top 40 were on a negative note, while Namibia's overall index showed sign of appreciation. Stocks in Asia were mixed following unstable trading session where stocks fluctuated between gains and losses. Nikkei and Shanghai Composite Index started on a positive note, while the Hang Seng Index started on a negative terrain. European markets were higher as investors monitored a fresh batch of economic data and a storm of corporate earnings results. DAX, FTSE 100 and CAC 40 started with gains. While in the United States, stocks on Tuesday, 23rd October were on a seesaw, with the Dow recovering from a 500-point loss.
Many thanks, Bosede. Now, this is where we end today's edition of Business Express. Keep a date with us on Friday for another episode on the program. But before we go, remember you can contribute to the program via our website, Business Express at nta.gov.ng. You can also reach us through our Twitter handle, NTA News Now. Don't forget the hashtag BizExp. I am Amina Nujaim. Bye for now.